My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old. I work as a school counselor in Nashville, Tennessee, and 3 months ago, my husband stood up at Thanksgiving dinner in front of both of our family's 22 people and announced that our 6-year-old son wasn't his. He demanded a DNA test right there at the table in front of my own mother, in front of his parents, in front of my son, who was old enough to understand every single word. I want to tell you what that test actually proved, because it wasn't what anyone in that room was expecting, including my husband. Before I get into it, if you've ever been publicly accused of something you didn't do by someone who already knew the truth, this story is for you. Subscribe if that resonates, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, because I genuinely read every single one. I should tell you about my marriage first, because the shape of what happened makes more sense once you understand where we started. I met my husband Ethan 10 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding in Charleston. He worked in commercial real estate, ambitious, charming, in the specific way that made people lean in when he talked. We got married 2 years later, and our son Caleb was born 4 years after that, after 18 months of trying, and one round of fertility treatment that finally worked. I remember holding Caleb for the first time and looking at Ethan's face, seeing him cry for the first and only time in our entire relationship. I never once, not for a single day in 6 years, questioned whether Caleb was his son. There was never a reason to. Ethan's career had shifted over the past 2 years into a new firm, longer hours, more travel, more late nights that turned into working weekends. I noticed the distance growing between us, the way you notice a tide going out, slowly, gradually, easy to explain away one excuse at a time. Busy season? A difficult client? A deal that needed constant attention. I told myself that's simply what happens in a 10-year marriage with a demanding career attached to it. I want you to hold on to that explanation because it's going to matter enormously later. Thanksgiving this year was hosted at my in-laws' house outside Nashville. The whole extended family gathered, my parents driving in from Knoxville. Ethan's sister and her husband, aunts, uncles, cousins, the full 22-person table Ethan's mother insists on every single year. Caleb sat between Ethan and me, 6 years old, still in his good sweater, excited about the pie more than anything else on the table. Dinner was normal for the first hour. Then Ethan's Uncle Frank, a little too many glasses of wine into the evening, made an offhand comment about how Caleb didn't look a thing like the Brooks side, the kind of casual, thoughtless remark relatives make, without thinking, the kind that usually gets laughed off and forgotten within a minute. Ethan didn't laugh it off. He set down his fork, looked directly at me, and said loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Actually, I've been wondering about that myself." The table went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when everyone suddenly needs something urgent to do with their hands. I remember genuinely thinking for one confused second that he was making some kind of dry joke. He wasn't. "I want a DNA test," Ethan said, still looking at me, his voice flat and deliberate in a way I had genuinely never heard from him before. "I think it's time we found out the truth. If you're already feeling your stomach turn a little, stay with me, because it gets much more complicated before it gets resolved. And if this is hitting close to home for you, drop a comment and let me know, because I genuinely read every single one. I want you to understand what that moment actually felt like, sitting at a table with 22 people, my 6-year-old son beside me, old enough to understand every word being said about him, my own mother across the table with her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not yet. I looked at my husband and asked the only question that mattered. "Ethan, why would you say that in front of everyone in front of him?" "Because I want the truth," he said, "and I want it out in the open where everyone can hear it." I want you to notice something in that sentence, because I noticed it too, sitting frozen at that table. He didn't say he wanted the truth privately, quietly, between the two of us, the way any reasonable person navigating a genuine doubt would want it. He wanted it public, immediate, witnessed by both families at once. That specific choice, the choice to make it a spectacle rather than a private conversation, is the detail that would end up mattering more than almost anything else in this entire story. My mother stood up first, her voice sharp. "Ethan, you will not do this to my daughter at a dinner table with your family watching." Ethan's own mother, to her credit, looked mortified, reaching for his arm, saying his name in a low, warning tone. Caleb, sitting right there in his good sweater, asked quietly, "Daddy, what's a DNA test?" And I watched something in Ethan's face flicker just for a second, something that might have been shame gone as fast as it appeared. I didn't answer Ethan's demand at that table. I stood up, took Caleb's hand, and told him we were going to get some air. I walked him out to the backyard, sat with him on the porch steps, and told him as calmly as I could manage, with my hands shaking, that grown-ups sometimes say confusing things when they're upset, and that none of it was his fault, not one single word of it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake next to a man I genuinely no longer recognized, replaying the specific way he'd said "I wanted" out in the open, turning it over and over, because something about that phrase felt less like doubt and more like planning. The next morning, I called my closest friend Danielle, who works as a family law paralegal, mostly just to process what had happened out loud. When I told her exactly what Ethan had said and how publicly he'd said it, she went quiet for a moment. "Natalie, I need you to hear this from someone outside your marriage. A man who genuinely suspects infidelity usually asks quietly, privately terrified of being wrong. A man who announces it in front of 22 people is making a public record for a reason. You need to get an independent test done through a proper accredited lab with a documented chain of custody, not whatever cheap kit he's about to hand you." I agreed to the test not because I doubted the outcome for a single second, but because I understood clearly that Ethan had made this a matter of public record, and I needed the actual official record to exist too, on my own terms, through a lab I chose myself. I want to pause the story here and ask you something because I've thought about it constantly since. If your own husband stood up at a family dinner and demanded a DNA test in front of everyone, would you have agreed immediately the way I did, or would you have refused entirely on principle? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely still go back and forth on it myself. I scheduled the test through an accredited genetics lab in Nashville, one that offered full legal chain of custody documentation, specifically because I wanted no ambiguity whatsoever in the results. Ethan agreed to it almost too easily, which in hindsight should have told me something. Caleb's cheek swab, Ethan's cheek swab, mine, all done in a single clinical appointment 3 days after Thanksgiving. Caleb thinking it was simply a normal doctor's visit because I refused to let him understand what was actually being tested. The lab told us results would take 7 to 10 business days. Those 10 days were some of the longest of my entire life, not because I doubted the outcome, but because I was living inside a marriage that had just publicly, deliberately humiliated me, and I didn't yet understand why. During those 10 days, I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I started paying closer attention. I noticed Ethan's phone always face down now, a habit that had crept in gradually over the past year that I'd simply stopped registering as unusual. I noticed a new gym membership charge on our joint statement for a location nowhere near either of our offices. I noticed that late nights at work had specific patterns now, always Tuesdays and Thursdays, always ending around the same time, always followed by him showering immediately when he got home, something he'd never once done before in 10 years of marriage. I didn't confront him about any of it yet. I wanted the DNA results first. I wanted one piece of solid ground before I said anything else. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work between counseling sessions. I opened the email in the school parking lot, my hands shaking, and read the summary line twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. Caleb was without any statistical doubt whatsoever Ethan's biological son. Exactly what I already knew to be true. I sat in that parking lot and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, exactly. Something colder. Because now I had proof, official, documented, undeniable proof that Ethan had stood up in front of 22 people and accused me of infidelity that never happened, and I still didn't understand why a man who genuinely trusted his marriage would ever choose to do that publicly. I called the lab directly the next morning because something in the report had caught my eye, a small paragraph near the bottom I'd initially skimmed past. The lab, like many accredited genetics providers, now offered an opt-in relative matching service as part of their standard testing package, cross-referencing submitted DNA against their broader database to identify potential biological relatives who had also used the same lab or partner services. I hadn't paid much attention to it initially. Ethan, when we scheduled the test, had specifically requested this feature be included, telling the technician he wanted the full report, everything included. At the time, I'd assumed it was simple thoroughness. I would soon understand it very differently. The genetic counselor who called me back that Tuesday afternoon had a careful, measured tone I recognized instantly, the same tone Denise from the insurance fraud department would have used, the tone people in these professions learn specifically for moments like this one. "Mrs. Brooks, I want to walk you through something in the report that requires some context," she said. "The relative matching feature flagged a close biological relative connection for your son, a half-sibling match with another individual in our database. I want to be clear, this is separate from the paternity result itself, which is fully confirmed. But given that the match is a young child and given the degree of genetic overlap, I wanted to make sure you understood what you were looking at before you had questions later." I sat very still, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "A half-sibling," I said slowly. "Meaning Ethan has another child." "Based on the genetic markers, yes, that would be the most likely explanation," she said carefully. "I can't disclose identifying information about the other individual without their consent, but I wanted you to have this context directly from us, rather than discover it unexpectedly on your own. If you're already feeling your stomach turn the way mine did in that moment, I understand completely." Ethan had stood up at a family dinner, publicly accused me of infidelity, demanded a test in front of everyone specifically to embarrass me, requested the full relative matching report himself, and in doing so had accidentally, unknowingly exposed his own secret child from an affair he had absolutely no idea I was about to discover. I want to ask you something here because I've turned it over constantly since. Do you think Ethan actually believed Caleb wasn't his? Or do you think the accusation was never really about paternity at all, but about creating a distraction? A manufactured crisis loud enough to bury something he was already hiding? Tell me what you think in the comments, because my own answer to that question changed twice over the following week. I hired a private investigator, a recommendation from Danielle, a quiet, methodical woman named Renata Cole, who specialized in exactly these kinds of situations. Within 8 days, Renata had what I needed. Ethan had been in a relationship for just over 3 years with a woman named Kayla Simmons, a marketing coordinator at a firm 2 floors below his office. They had a daughter together, 4 years old, named Willow. Ethan had been quietly paying for a separate apartment in her name for the past 2 years, the gym membership charges on our joint statement actually routing Renata, discovered through a shared account tied to that same address. 3 years, a 4-year-old daughter, an entire second life running parallel to ours hidden inside Tuesday and Thursday late nights, and a phone that never once left his hand. I understood finally why Ethan had made that accusation so publicly at Thanksgiving. I believe, and Danielle agreed with this once she saw everything Renata found, that Ethan had grown genuinely afraid I was starting to suspect something, the phone habits, the late nights, and he had made a calculated bet. If he accused me first loudly publicly of infidelity, it would reframe the entire narrative before I ever had the chance to raise my own suspicions. A public accusation makes you the wronged party. It makes any doubt you later raise about him look like retaliation instead of discovery. He hadn't been protecting a genuine doubt about Caleb. He'd been building himself an alibi. I didn't confront Ethan the moment I found out. I did what I've learned through all of this that I do best. I got quiet and I got organized. I met with a family attorney, a sharp, direct woman named Priya Anand, and laid out everything Renata had found: the apartment, the payments, the child, the DNA relative match report as supporting documentation. Priya explained that in Tennessee, evidence of a concealed second household and ongoing financial deception could meaningfully affect both the divorce settlement and the framing of custody discussions. particularly given that Ethan had also caused documented emotional harm to Caleb through the public accusation itself, something a family court would take seriously. I decided exactly how I wanted this to land. Not through a screaming match in our kitchen. I wanted the truth to return to the exact place the lie had been told in front of the same 22 people who had watched Ethan humiliate me over pie and turkey 3 months earlier. Ethan's mother, still mortified by what had happened at her own Thanksgiving table, had been quietly, gently checking in with me over the following months, clearly uncomfortable with what her son had done. When she invited us to a smaller holiday gathering, just immediate family this time, 12 people instead of 22, I asked if I could bring something to share before dinner. She said, of course, assuming I meant a dish. I brought the DNA report instead, the paternity confirmation on top, the relative match summary beneath it, and Priya's letter outlining the separated household discovery attached at the back. Ethan, to his credit, or perhaps simply out of fear, had been walking on eggshells around me for weeks by that point, sensing something had shifted, but not knowing exactly what. When I set the folder on his parents' dining table before anyone had even sat down, his face changed instantly. Everyone should probably see this, I said, since everyone was there for the accusation. His father read it first, his face going pale line by line. His mother covered her mouth. Ethan stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "Natalie, we don't need to do this right now. You didn't give me that choice at Thanksgiving," I said as evenly as I could manage. "You did this in front of everyone. So the truth gets to come back the same way." His sister read the relative match summary next, and I watched her expression shift from confusion to horror as she understood exactly what it meant. "Ethan," she said quietly, "is this saying you have another kid?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence in that room said everything the DNA report had already confirmed on paper. His mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. "You stood at my table and accused this woman in front of this entire family of doing to you exactly what you had already done to her." I want to be honest that I hadn't expected his mother's reaction to be quite that sharp, quite that immediate. I had braced myself for defensiveness for someone in that room trying to soften what Ethan had done. Instead, his own mother looked at her son with something I can only describe as genuine grief. Not for me exactly, but for the family she'd thought she'd raised. Here's where things stand now. Ethan and I are in the process of finalizing our divorce with Priya, handling the settlement and custody arrangement, both of which are proceeding considerably more favorably for Caleb and me given the documented circumstances. Caleb, for his part, is doing better than I expected, though he still occasionally asks me why Daddy said what he said at Thanksgiving, and I tell him honestly that sometimes grown-ups say hurtful things when they're scared of being caught doing something wrong themselves, and that none of it, not one single word of it, was ever his fault. My relationship with Ethan's mother surprisingly has remained warm. She calls to check on Caleb regularly, and told me once quietly that she wished she'd trusted her own instincts sooner, instead of assuming her son would never do something like that. Ethan and Kayla are apparently still together, and I genuinely hope for Willow's sake that whatever they build going forward is built more honestly than what he built with me. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. A public accusation is rarely about the truth someone claims to be seeking. Very often it's about controlling the story before the real truth has a chance to come out on its own. If someone you love makes you the villain loudly in front of an audience, before you've even had the chance to ask a single question, pay very close attention to what they might be trying to bury underneath it. If this reminded you of your own moment of being accused of something you didn't do, share this with someone who'd understand. Tell me in the comments, did you suspect Ethan was hiding something the moment he demanded that test in public, or did the twist genuinely surprise you the way it surprised me? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.